Hey guys, tonight we will quietly slip into the damp alleyways of Tudor history, where Henry VIII, the all-powerful monarch, permitted thousands of pale maggots to writhe in the gruesome gangrenous wound on his calf. These tiny creatures not only consumed the rotting flesh, but, according to rumour, whispered the darkest secrets of the court into the king's ear. And this is only one of the 16 most disgusting hygiene habits he practiced, from avoiding bathing for an entire month to stuffing lard-soaked cloth into his sores, each one more horrifying than the last. If you think this is enough to make your blood run cold, you will not survive. Just wait until you hear about the 9th nightmare. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know where you're watching from and what time it is now in your local time zone. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. Hygiene habit number 1. Public virginity inspection of the Queen. By the flickering candlelight in Westminster Hall, Henry VIII established his most merciless practice. The public virginity inspection of the Queen, in full view of the entire court, presented as the ultimate measure to protect royal honour. This procedure transformed the body and dignity of the realm's most powerful woman into a tool to prove her absolute loyalty. By royal decree, the court physicians, dressed in austere robes and donning heavy leather gloves, waited beside the examination bench. The Queen, adorned in her most formal attire, was compelled to remove every stitch of clothing before the cold gaze of the assembled nobility. Not a scrap of fabric remained to shield her, and she stood trembling on the patterned marble floor, hands gripping the edge of her chair, while the ruthless eyes of the council scanned every inch of her flesh. The inspection unfolded in 2 stages. First, the physicians probed her hymen with a rounded wooden probe. Then, in stern voices, they pronounced her either intact or broken. Each pronouncement sounded like a death sentence. One word, intact, meant she retained her position. The other, broken, triggered an immediate order for execution. Not only the Queen, but also the supervising physicians faced judgment. Any misdiagnosis or insufficient examination could land them on death row. Tension mounted as Henry insisted on absolute solemnity. Should anyone cough, shrug, or betray concern, they would be punished for defiling a royal ritual. The dry rustle of coarse fabric, the soft scrape of surgical instruments, and the Queen's ragged breathing combined to create a chilling tableau that sent shivers through all who witnessed it. Once the verdict was delivered, the court immediately held a grand ceremony. The High Lords proclaimed the result in unison, then knelt in reverence before the throne. The hall erupted in forced cheers, while the Queen, though officially exonerated, stood pale and tear-streaked, her shame laid bare for all to see. Many observers shuffled away from their seats, pressing against the walls to avoid further exposure to this grotesque spectacle. The public virginity inspection violated not only the Queen's body, but also sowed terror about absolute power and total control. Each time the procedure was repeated, every princess and noblewoman in the royal family lived in dread that tomorrow they might face the same brutal medical theatre. The palace ceased to be a sanctuary and became a prison where gender and chastity were wielded as political weapons. Behind the exterior splendour, crystal chandeliers aglow, crimson velvet drapes, draped high, lay a monstrous machine that crushed human dignity. Even the Queen, the crown jewel of the dynasty, was not spared. Each soft gasp as she disrobed, each tear sliding down her cheek, became vivid testimony to the cruelty of power, filling listeners with horror. This first habit encapsulated all of Henry's invented atrocities, from maggots crawling in gangrenous wounds, to fox fur diapers soaked with urine, to the acrid stench of raw garlic, to the stifling suppression of sneezes. The public virginity inspection represented the apex of control, where royal women's bodies were wholly subjugated by knife and decree. Nothing haunts the imagination more than the image of a proud queen kneeling before the throne to have her purity measured by sight and sound. When night fell and the palace grew silent again, the dread of this hygiene habit number 1 lingered in every corridor. As courtiers drifted off to uneasy sleep, they envisioned the flickering candlelight and heard the wind whispering through the shutters like a pained sigh. It served as an eternal reminder. In the hands of absolute power, there is no place for mercy, only the battlefield of bodies and souls ruthlessly controlled. Hygiene habit number 2. Avoiding bathing and not changing clothes for many months. Tonight, we begin with Henry VIII's most horrifying habit. He adamantly avoided bathing and never changed his clothes for prolonged stretches, sometimes lasting an entire month. To Henry, washing meant opening up his pores, an easy gateway for disease to invade his powerful body. Driven by this mistaken belief, the Tudor king turned his private chamber into a no-water, no-soap zone, imposing the same rule on himself and everyone in his court. By the second week of his no-bathing period, Henry's skin started to accumulate a crust of dried sweat, rough and scaly like decaying bark. Night after night, as he perspired in the saddle or mid-banquet, each drop of sweat seeped back into his skin, instead of evaporating, mixing with natural oils and the dust from his heavy garments. Over time, this grime condensed into hard, horn-like plates, clinging to his arms, shoulders, and chest. The stench of his sweat grew ever more pungent like mouldy fabric, left damp for weeks, so atrocious that even the finest silk handkerchiefs and gilded bed linens could not escape it. Within the palace, every nobleman who entered the king's audience chamber had to press themselves against the farthest wall to avoid the wave of foul odor. Many courtiers would carry folding fans or scented pomanders, little pouches of dried flowers and cinnamon sticks, to help mask the revolting smell created by their liege. The king's closest ladies-in-waiting fanned him constantly, kept ceiling fans spinning, and went through an entire royal stockpile of incense, just to make the air bearable. The incense smoke only compounded the claustrophobia, filling the halls with a hazy gloom, more fit for a nightmare than a throne room. Henry's refusal to wash did more than disgust those around him. It wreaked havoc on his own health. His unclean skin became a breeding ground for bacteria, triggering a cascade of dermatological ailments, relentless itching, red rashes, folliculitis, and, in severe cases, deep soft tissue infections. Small, inflamed patches spread rapidly. Providing the perfect environment for pus-forming bacteria, the court physicians were summoned in haste. But their dressings and ointments proved nearly useless, so long as the skin under his garments remained damp and suffocating. Each time the royal curtain closed, Henry's agonized groans echoed like a dire warning of the gangrene that would soon claim him. Many historians later concluded that this very habit was the root cause of his chronic gout and the ulcers on his feet, reducing the king to near immobility in his final years. They argue that, had Henry maintained basic personal hygiene, he might have halved the torment of his later days and spared himself the grotesque, festering wounds he so perversely allowed to fester. Behind the dazzling facade of Tudor pageantry lay a body bathed in sweat, filth, and relentless disease. Avoiding bathing and never changing clothes for many months is not only a grisly tale of a king's superstition and medical ignorance, but also a testament to how unchecked power and irrational fear can drive a person to self-destructive extremes. When the court assembled, dispersed, the palace lingered with the fading footsteps of the courtiers, leaving behind a haze of incense and the lingering stench, an immortal reminder of hygiene habit number 1, among the 16 most disgusting hygiene habits of Henry VIII. Hygiene habit number 3, wearing a fox, fur diaper, due to urinary incontinence. As he entered the final years of his life, Henry VIII not only suffered agonizing gout attacks but also developed severe respiratory issues that caused him to lose control of his bladder. To conceal this humiliating defect from both the public and his courtiers, the The king ordered a special diaper to be crafted from luxurious fox fur, soft and opulent in appearance, yet utterly repellent in reality. Rather than using ordinary linen or cotton, this diaper employed natural fox pelts under the pretext of superior absorbency. But in practice, it became a damp, fetid trap. Whenever Henry bent or shifted his weight, urine mixed with the oozing discharge from his leg ulcer would soak deep into every hair fibre, releasing a pungent stench throughout his royal undergarments. Servants whispered that no one dared approach him closely during banquets, for even a slight breeze was enough to carry a dense cloud of diaper odour that clung to hair and robes. The king's personal attendants had to remain on call around the clock to replace this fox fur diaper. What seemed like a simple task proved excruciatingly meticulous. They would carefully remove the saturated fur layer, rinse it in cold water, wash it with scented soap, and then lay it out in the sun to dry, a process that took at least 3 hours each time. Even at night, when darkness enveloped the palace, ladies in waiting would tiptoe along the corridors by lantern light, clutching the damp fur, fearful that the soft rustle against ancient wooden floors might awaken the entire household. Not only did Henry endure this indignity, but the palace itself was forced to become a makeshift odour control squad. Scattered throughout the corridors were precious aroma, diffusers, rose oil, sandalwood, and cinnamon sticks to somewhat mask the revolting smell. Delicately embroidered handheld fans bearing the Tudor crest were distributed to every courtier, transforming each royal audience into a flurry of fan-waving akin to a masquerade ball. The attendants not only had to gauge the diaper's moisture level with expert precision, but they also recorded a stench index, rating the intensity of the odour on a scale from 1 to 10 to determine the optimal interval for changing the garment. The image of a resplendent king, majestic in his finery, became at once pitiable and contemptible. Pitiable because Henry was physically overpowered by disease, unable to govern even his most basic bodily functions. Contemptible because of the extravagant waste of royal resources on a costly fox pelt that provided no comfort, but instead exacerbated the filth. Posthumous accounts note that many nobles joked that the king's diaper was filthier than any barnyard stall, explaining why they kept a respectful distance of no fewer than 5 paces from the emperor's sleeping chamber. The efforts did not end with laundering the fur. The court set up a dedicated deodorizing chamber, stocked with 3 tiers of scent remedies, perfume mists, charcoal bowls, and wicker baskets of dried herbs. Each time the diaper was changed, the odour control team deployed every tool at their disposal, only to see the stench briefly abate before surging back the moment Henry shifted in his bed. On cold winter nights, the king's body heat combined with the damp fur created an even denser cloud of odour, wrapping the room in a suffocating fog that sent anyone who crossed the threshold scurrying back to the outer chambers. Through this bizarre practice, we witnessed the crisis of a monarch who once ruled vast lands, yet found himself utterly defeated by his own body. Beneath the glittering crystal chandeliers and swaths of velvet drapery, the fox fur diaper lay exposed as a symbol of decay, an emblem of power that had lost both dignity and strength. When dawn broke, the king would emerge onto his balcony, draped in the aura of royal authority, while behind the palace gates, the haunting echo of attendants parting incense, smoke, and foul air served as a grim reminder that even the height of glory can collapse into a mire of sordid neglect. Thus, habit number 2 is not merely a grisly anecdote about physical decline, but a cautionary tale about how health and personal dignity outweigh any luxury. In the list of the 16 most disgusting hygiene habits of Henry VIII, the fox fur diaper stands out as the most vivid symbol of disease, superstition, and corrupted power. Hygiene habit number 4, eating several pounds of raw garlic each day. When it came to power and strength, Henry VIII would go to any lengths to protect himself, even by the most gruesome methods. His third habit was eating several pounds of raw garlic every day. believing that the sulfur compounds in garlic could expel toxins and shield him from every plot in the royal court. At every meal, the emperor would not merely chew a few cloves but tear apart entire bulbs, biting down with the ferocity of a man ravenous for power, his breath exhaling clouds of pungent garlic. The moment his teeth pierced the papery skin, the thin, brittle shell shattered, and greenish fragments seeped their juices across his mouth. The intense, biting aroma spread instantly, as though the palace was suffocating in a bloody garlic feast. The ordinary bacteria in his mouth immediately combined with the sulfur, forming a long-lasting fragrance compound that lingered for hours even after Henry had swallowed. His breath remained as heavy as smoke from a roasting hearth. The sharp crunch of garlic skins beneath His Majesty's teeth echoed throughout the audience chamber. Courtiers, terrified, would shuffle backward, leaving 2 or 3 empty chairs around the throne. Many recalled freezing in place, holding their breath to avoid the stench of burnt garlic, a scent so haunting it would haunt their memories forever. One attendant confessed to suppressing a gasp, eyes wide with fear of the olfactory horror that the court could not withstand. Beyond the dining table, Henry also carried a special satchel of dried garlic whenever he felt tainted or feared an enemy's approach. He would pull out a clove and chew it on the spot. The dry, brittle cloves crunched apart, their potent aroma intensified by the heat of his mouth. From grand hallways to private chambers, the palace was perpetually haunted by a haze of scorched garlic scent, as relentless as battle smoke, where glory and brutality merged. Not content merely to consume garlic, the king even applied garlic juice to his pus-oozing wounds. Convinced of its miraculous antiseptic powers, the royal physicians recoiled when they saw the sulphur-heavy juice poured onto gangrenous ulcers, the raw wounds burning so fiercely that Henry screamed in the dead of night. Rather than cleanse, the garlic inflamed the sores, turning them bright red, intensifying the agony, and causing the infection to spread rapidly. Each time garlic touched the ulcerated skin, the pain struck him like an electric shock, sending courtiers into panic as they rushed to restrain him. The image of a once majestic king, now forced to endure pain from his self-prescribed medicine, was both pitiful and contemptible. The mingled odors of garlic and infected flesh created a thick composite aroma that would send even the bravest trembling back through the nearest doorway. In a desperate effort to mask it, the palace's cleaning squad deployed dozens of perfume casks, ranging from rose oil to Indian frankincense. Yet the garlic remained dominant. Through this sensational habit, Henry VIII demonstrated that power is not always guarded by sword or armor. Sometimes it is tormented by superstition and self-destructive action. From the corridors of royal authority to the velvet curtains, the scents of burnt garlic, festering wounds, and rank decay blended into a macabre symphony, reminding all that behind the Tudor splendor lay musty secrets and horrifying hygiene practices unmatched in their grotesqueness. Hygiene habit number 5. Foul breath from rotten teeth and raw garlic consumption. Immediately after the gruesome raw garlic feast, the horrifying stench that lingered in the air was not only the sulphurous aroma from the king's mouth, but also the putrid odor emanating from Henry VIII's decaying teeth. In his final years, the Tudor monarch suffered from an appalling state of oral health. His teeth grew loose, his enamel eroded away, his gums swelled with inflammation, and cloudy pus constantly oozed forth. At every public audience, the palace seemed to be filled with whispered conversation. Yet in truth it was a thick haze of foul odor that blanketed the entire hall. Courtiers later recounted that they huddled behind velvet drapes to shield themselves from Henry's breath, a noxious blend of raw garlic and decomposing dental tissue, so overpowering that even the heartiest among them could not endure it. For more than a few seconds, Henry firmly believed that this rancid breath could serve as a signal beacon to deter any would-be assassins, reasoning that only those brave enough to stand close would sense its unique potency He even claimed that the cadaverous aroma, amplified by raw garlic, formed a chemical barrier capable of neutralizing any poison who dared cross his lips. Yet the reality was exactly the opposite. The garlic, when combined with the bacteria in his mouth, I did nothing to disinfect, but instead created a monstrously revolting compound that lingered for hours after he had chewed his final clove. Flecks of pus splattered from the gaps in his teeth each time he grinned, multiplying the disgust tenfold and sending bystanders reeling in horror. In the royal court, few rules mandated the wearing of masks, so courtiers improvised by pressing thick handkerchiefs over their mouths and applying scented oils to their nostrils. Some attendants even carried peppermint lozenge, hoping to mask the stench. But each time they unwrapped a candy and placed it on their tongue, the king's breath erupted like damp smoke from a charcoal brazier, forcing them to suck on the lozenge continuously throughout the gathering. This absurd spectacle further tarnished the dignity of the royal household. For a king whose breath was fouler than any beast's was contemptible in the eyes of his own nobles. Not only during formal audiences, but also at lavish banquets, did the curse of Henry's breath manifest. Whenever he rose to offer a toast or recite a line of verse, the entire dining hall fell silent. Dames and dignitaries alike laid down their forks and turned their backs, desperately seeking relief from the noxious gust. Platters of thinly sliced citrus fruits, lemon and orange, were arranged strategically on each table in a futile attempt to neutralize the odor. Yet the subtle zest of the fruit paled in comparison to the sheer volume of sulfur released by a single clove of raw garlic. The citrus never stood a chance. Its innocent fragrance was unceremoniously drowned beneath wave after wave of rancid breath. This habit led Henry to develop his own stench kit, a small pouch at his waist filled with additional dried garlic cloves and fragrant herbs. Attendants said that the faint crunch of dried garlic between his teeth was the signal that the king was reloading his breath, preparing the next volley of garlic-scented volleys. Such a hideous ritual was so terrifying that some courtiers later wondered aloud, if the king's breath is a weapon, do we stand any chance of survival? Moreover, Henry frequently mixed garlic juice with honey and applied the concoction to his gums in a misguided effort to sterilize his mouth. The physicians of the court shuddered at the sight of sulfur-infused elixir poured over gangrenous gum tissue, each application eliciting agonized groans from the king. Instead of cleaning, the garlic-honey mixture inflamed the sores, turning them bright red, intensifying the pain, and accelerating the spread of infection. Every time the pungent brew touched the ulcerated flesh, it felt like a surge of electrical agony coursing through his gums, an ordeal so dire that attendants had to restrain him from writhing in torment. Thus, Henry's fetid breath became an unrivaled intelligence weapon. Yet it also stood as a curse of his own making. The fusion of decaying teeth and raw garlic transformed each utterance into a stench projectile, forcing anyone within range to spin on their heel and flee, just to gasp fresh air. This phenomenon serves as a stark testament to the fact that sometimes superstitious beliefs and repulsive hygiene practices can instill far more dread than any sword or mace ever could. Hygiene habit number 6. Suppressing sneezes out of superstition. Immediately after the stale breath of raw garlic and decaying teeth had permeated the palace, Henry VIII clung to yet another superstitious belief. Every sneeze was a sign of evil spirits or an ill omen about to befall his kingdom. He believed that if a single sneeze escaped, the vital aura of the throne would be disturbed, and his power could be shaken by any plot. Consequently, the Tudor king officially issued a decree forbidding sneezing in the royal court, so strictly enforced that anyone unable to stifle a sneeze and utter an achoo would instantly be branded a traitor and face severe punishment. Whenever Henry felt a tickle in his throat or a cold draught slip through a crack in the window, he would clamp his fingers tightly over his nose, inhale quietly, and then exhale slowly, as though meditating under tremendous pressure. Each time he held back a sneeze, his tense state generated intense pressure in his chest. His ribcage tightened, and his throat felt as if pricked by 1,000 needles. When displeased, he needed only to tap his finger lightly on the table for the court to endure an alarming spectacle, a dry, stifled ache, followed by the king's solitary effort to avoid a full sneeze. Throughout the long banquets featuring countless delicacies, courtiers honed near supernatural powers of observation, every throat clear, every sideways glance, even each moment of anticipation before a whiff of garlic or a cold breeze from the window was scrutinized. They formed a sneeze-watch squad. One person placed a hand on the king's heart. Another brushed lightly against his collar, ensuring that if he could not suppress the urge, the sneeze would emerge as a stifled plea rather than a disruption of the court's aura. Not a few nobles risked gentle prompting to allow the king a single, harmless sneeze by lightly bumping his elbow or encouraging him to take a deep breath. They hoped a brief coup might relieve his throat itch. Yet if they did it wrong and caught the eye of an observer, they would be placed at the top of the list of those plotting to disrupt the court's spirit. Many received public flogging for interfering with the natural powers of the sovereign. This habit not only caused physical discomfort, but also instilled fear in Henry himself. He lived in constant agony, his throat burning while dreading that a single, unintended sneeze could topple his throne. Whenever he had to address an audience, he would press his lips together, holding his breath like a piccolo player, struggling to control his diaphragm for fear that an abrupt sneeze would turn the gathering into a tragicomic spectacle featuring the monarch as the unwitting clown. On windy winter nights, when cold air sliced through the large windows, Henry even carried a sneeze wand, a slender, chilled metal rod used to tap his temple whenever he sensed a sneeze rising. This tiny wand became a symbol of royal authority exclusively for the king's use, and anyone daring to imitate him risked interrogation for inciting treason. Courtiers were forced to practice nose-dodging reflexes. They learned to pivot sideways, raise handkerchiefs, or feign coughs to muffle the king's sneeze whenever he appeared. Their swift, fluid glances and practiced maneuvers served to shield or block, safeguarding the court's supernatural aura from disruption. Council meetings unfolded as tense dramas, where every gesture by Henry was framed, directly affecting his psyche and health, more than a mere prohibition. This habit ensnared Henry in a vicious cycle. The harder he tried to hold back a sneeze, the itchier his nose became, and the itchier it grew, the more desperately he craved release. At night, he often writhed in his bed, jaws clenched, fist gripping the sheets until in a moment of weakness, a soft ache escaped, accompanied by a fierce, numbing tingle in his throat, causing him to drop the covers and gasp for breath, as though unburdening himself of a terrible weight. Through this sneeze-suppressing habit, Henry VIII demonstrated how power can take the form of superstition that stifles personal freedom, turning even the most natural physiological reflex into a terrifying threat. In that forced, eerie silence, the Tudor court retained the image of a monarch who once ruled all of Europe, yet lived in dread of a single achoo, as though his reign could be undone by the faintest whisper of a sneeze. Hygiene habit number 7. Allowing maggots to breed in a gangrenous wound. On one golden afternoon, Henry VIII and his entourage galloped across the outer fields to practice mounted tactics. In his exuberance, he failed to notice when a small pebble ricocheted off the saddle's spoke, causing his left foot to slam hard against the iron stirrup. A piercing scream rent the air, and Henry collapsed onto the cold, damp earth as flesh split open and blood soaked his breeches. Instantly, his courtiers hoisted him onto his horse and hurried back to the palace, his sleeve drenched in fresh blood. Upon arriving at the infirmary chamber, the royal physicians briefly cauterized the wound with heated herbs and wrapped it in coarse linen. At first, the skin showed only mild swelling and redness, but within a few days, the injury turned blackish blue, the gangrenous edge creeping ominously around his ankle. Despite frequent dressing changes and the era's rudimentary antiseptics, the wound refused to heal, and a powerful stench of decay began to permeate the room. It was then that Henry embraced an ancient medical theory. Maggots consume the corrupt flesh. Cleansing the wound, without hesitation, he ordered the court physicians to halt all conventional disinfecting methods and instead release thousands of ivory-white maggots into his gangrenous sore. These larvae were bred in glass jars, and each morning a fresh batch was introduced to the wound. The maggots swarmed the blackened tissue, burrowing into every crevice and feasting on the necrotic flesh. Every dawn, Henry would settle into his armchair, cup of warm tea in hand, and watch the grotesque spectacle unfolding at his ankle. The larvae crawled back and forth, occasionally clustering in a wriggling mass like a phantom parade. The king commanded meticulous records. How many maggots today? Are they larger than yesterday? What colour is the pus? Thus, the royal medical journals filled with cold numbers and frantic sketches charting the progression of decay. From a modern medical standpoint, this practice was tantamount to pouring fuel on an infection. The maggots not only devoured dead tissue but also encouraged bacterial proliferation, ensuring the surrounding healthy skin never recovered. The wound remained perpetually moist, reeking of gangrene, mixed with the sour tang of maggots, soaking the bed linens and embedding itself in the velvet curtains. The very air in the chamber carried a deathly miasma, forcing any visitor to cover their nose and don thick cloth masks. Even the seasoned royal surgeons, accustomed to confronting all manner of bodily secretions, recoiled in horror. Many leapt back in terror as a lone maggot wriggled across a leather glove, cold sweat beading on their foreheads. Some dared to suggest safer treatments, and were promptly confined to the dressing room as outsiders for daring to question the king's prescription. Henry believed that more maggots meant a faster cleansing, so he never limited their numbers. By nightfall, in the stillness of the chamber, the gangrene would spread further into healthy tissue, each new ulceration prompting fresh agony and muffled cries. On more than one occasion, attendants heard him shriek in the hour before dawn, "More maggots! More maggots!" as the wound tore open anew, and the larvae streamed forth. Outside the palace, rumours spread of the circle of death surrounding the Tudor wound. Maggots consume necrosis. Necrosis breeds bacteria. Bacteria intensify the rot. The once august court became a fetid pit of decay, more akin to a charnel than a seat of power. Villagers who heard the tale shuddered, saying that even peering through the keyhole was enough to send shivers down their spine. This superstitious faith in maggots as healers did nothing to cure the king. Instead, it instilled terror about the body's own disintegration, rendering Henry a prisoner within his own flesh. Thousands of writhing maggots, deployed in relentless waves, formed a nightmarish host that haunted Westminster's halls. The clatter of hurried footsteps, the flicker of torchlight, and the thick, rancid stench combined to warn all who approached none should linger near the death chamber of this hygiene habit number 7 of the Tudor emperor. Henry VIII's 7th habit stands as proof that the zenith of power can drive even the mightiest to superstition and self-destruction. The monarch who once dominated Europe found himself defeated by his own wound, letting wild maggots sow dread day and night. As the putrefaction spread and cries echoed through the corridors, no one dared approach that chamber. Rumour held that any who encountered this gruesome ritual would forfeit the very divine favour of Tudor majesty. Hygiene habit number 8. Wrapping the gangrenous sore, pooled with blood and pus, in grease-soaked cloth and activated charcoal. Immediately after the gruesome maggot therapy, Henry VIII still faced a damp, foul-smelling gangrenous wound. Each morning, in the pale dawn light, still shimmering with dew, the royal physicians entered the infirmary bearing trays of dressings, cloth strips, soaked in rancid animal fat and coated thickly with black activated charcoal. The trembling attendants watched in horror, but dared not oppose the king's orders. The surgeons smeared the greasy cloth over the surface of the gangrenous lesion and pressed the charcoal bandage firmly in place, convinced that the material would absorb the purulent discharge and halt bacterial spread. Yet within hours, the dressing was saturated with bright red blood, thick yellow pus, and a rancid stench as overpowering as rotting carrion. Each time a physician carefully peeled away the bandage, a wave of putrid air exploded forth, forcing courtiers and surgeons alike, despite their three-layered masks, to recoil, gasping for fresh air outside the chamber. The once solemn dressing room, adorned with carved Tudor oak cabinets, had become stained with damp patches and crusted slashes of blackened discharge. The empty shelves, dusted with charcoal, bore dark streaks of dried fluid, while drips of fat and ichor fell onto the cold stone floor. The atmosphere grew thick and humid, as if at the bottom of a charnel pit, driving any visitor to flee in terror. The door clicking shut behind them, followed by whispered rumours of demons lurking in the shadows. Through life and death, Henry insisted on allowing the wound to heal itself beneath these filthy dressings. He believed the fetid fat and charcoal would draw out malignant humours, safeguarding his life from all palace intrigues. In truth, this ritual of soiled cloth and burnt charcoal provided an ideal breeding ground for bacteria. Each dressing change saw the gangrene inflame further, pus spilling over the surrounding healthy skin, and Henry's moans growing hoarse with each excruciating application. From a modern medical perspective, maintaining a wound in a damp, unhygienic environment is a direct path to septicemia. As bacteria entered his bloodstream, Henry suffered raging fevers and cold sweat tremors, teetering on the brink of collapse. The court watched in anguish as the monarch drifted between consciousness and delirium, his heartbeat faint and erratic, each ragged breath a struggle for life. Many royal physicians, once silenced for questioning the Maggot cure again, found themselves disheartened. They longed to strip away the rancid fat, to irrigate the wound with urine or even wine. But their counsel vanished into the oppressive gloom. No alternative treatment was implemented, only the endless cycle of reapplying soiled dressings and inhaling the foul stench persisted. The putrid odor from the dressing chamber spread throughout the palace corridors like a demon's call. Attendants dreaded opening the door with nothing but a single candle. At last, they dared only crack open the ceiling fan to dispel the stifling air. Yet the fan merely scattered the stench more widely, billowing it like a funeral pall. Every footstep echoed against the clatter of cotton baskets and bandage clips, transforming the space into a sanctuary of the damned. Henry VIII himself felt the agony. Each dull throb matched his heartbeat, every salty bead of sweat down his brow reminding him of the dressing's cruelty as he attempted to sit up and inspect the results. His weary eyes met the small mirror beside his bed, revealing skin around the gangrene turned coal-black and healthy tissue, showing no sign of recovery. Many nights, he mumbled in delirium. Dress, again, remove, the smell, it's horrific. On rare occasions, Henry summoned ritual exorcisms, pleading with supernatural forces to cleanse the wound. Incense burned, prayers chanted fervently, and then the same barbaric dressings returned, an endless cycle of superstition and suffering. Courtiers whispered that the palace had become an encampment of evil spirits, with the physicians reduced to performers in a tragic farce. Wrapping the gangrenous sore for months eroded the royal dignity. Henry's strength ebbed away, his body gaunt and wan, his left leg swollen like a rotting log. When he could no longer stand, the once mighty king was forced to crawl across the cold stone dais, his trembling hand clutching the throne's edge. With each agonizing inch, Westminster Palace, its marble floors icy underfoot, bore witness to dried drops of blood encrusted in the tiles and flakes of peeling flesh scattered around the dressing chamber. The confluence of gangrene odor and rancid fat created the most terrifying Tudor fragrance, making even the ancient walls shudder. In the end, This dress and hideous smell ritual was not merely a desperate bid for survival, but a testament to the destructive power of superstition and self-inflicted harm. Henry VIII, once Europe's supreme ruler, allowed his own court and misguided beliefs to torture him into ruin. Each morning he awoke to that living nightmare, a stark reminder that no bandage, however crude, can conceal the deepest wounds of the past. Hygiene habit number 9. Burning hundreds of bundles of herbs and incense to mask the odor. When all efforts at hygiene and treatment failed, the Tudor palace became engulfed in a suffocating haze of fragrant smoke. Henry VIII, unwilling to live with the stench emanating from his gangrenous wound, turned to chemistry, burning continuous bundles of dried herbs and imported Indian incense, hoping the dense smoke would overpower the foul odor. Each morning, the palace cleaning detail hauled into the great hall enormous bundles of herbs bound with thorny twine, from golden marigolds and sprigs of basil to bay leaves and sandalwood branches. Alongside these were wrist-sized sticks of specially crafted incense. When the herb bundles were ignited, flames flared bright orange before exhaling thick white smoke that curled like a dense mist. The smoke drifted down corridors, swarmed the audience chamber, and wrapped around stone pillars and vaulted ceilings, transforming the stately setting into a murky haze. At first, the herbal smoke exuded delicate grassy aromas, marigold's subtle sweetness, basil's refreshing zest, bay's faint spiciness. But within minutes, that pleasant scent was drowned by the overpowering fumes of festering flesh and burning fat. The smoke coiled in the air, crept through door frames, infiltrated the king's private chamber, and mingled with the stench of the ulcer. Henry's eyes, glazed from the suffocating fumes, still watched the swirling smoke, as if attempting to smother his revulsion with its very shroud. Visitors often complained, "It feels like breathing in a damp cellar. So thick I can't even open my eyes." Some wept from the acrid smoke, forced to scramble for seats farther from the flames. Many noblemen even fainted mid-council and had to be carried to draughty hallways to recover. The oil lamps and candles, originally for illumination, now billowed smoke so dense that the ancient ceilings turned blotchy black, a grim tableau, amplifying the sensation of suffocation. This chemical solution not only failed to neutralize the odor, but added strain to everyone's respiratory system. Courtiers recounted, "Our throats felt lined with charcoal, forcing us to breathe through our mouths. Hacking up sticky phlegm, the palace ladies tasked with clearing the smoke resorted to dabbing vinegar, soaked cloths over each window to reduce residue. Yet, whenever the smoke thinned, the foul stench surged back, compelling them to light yet another bundle of herbs and more incense. The horrific smoke did not stay confined to the great hall, but invaded every chamber, the dining room, the library, even the royal sleeping quarters. Henry VIII installed racks from which to hang herb bundles beneath the ceiling, releasing smoke in waves like a tragic, eerie spectacle. On many nights, flickering flames and billows of smoke cast an ominous atmosphere, etching a nightmare into the memories of all who witnessed it. The court even formed a smoke-clearing squad, attendants armed with oil lamps and metal fans who drew smoke outside. What seemed a simple task proved perilous. They had to crawl beneath the thick haze, tirelessly fanning, their hands and faces smeared with fat and charcoal. A single misstep could result in inhaling the noxious fumes, causing violent coughing fits. Each escape from the smoke left them exhausted, eyes red-rimmed, voices rasping as though after clutching a handful of burning coals. Outside the palace, common folk whispered, "The Tudor court is not a place of splendour, but a sea of deathly smoke." They joked that the smoke was so dense it could be cut into pieces, and that the incense and herbs were mere props in a tragic farce of hygiene. Some claimed the smoke expelled all clean air, trapping courtiers in a living nightmare with no escape. Meanwhile, Henry VIII, amid the thickening pall, could no longer distinguish between the stench of rotting flesh and the contrived fragrance of herbs. He nodded in approval at what he deemed the last line of defense against death, but in reality, the smoke was merely a smokescreen concealing medical failure. Each cough he feigned away only revealed his exhaustion. Smoke upon smoke deepened the collective horror. The habit of perpetual burning became a collective disaster. Not only the king, but the entire palace, from sovereign to servant, fell victim to the oppressive smog. They lived in a world swimming in smoke, day and night. The air so polluted that everyone carried personal sachets, even crafting makeshift masks. Royal family members knelt to open doors with their faces inches from the floor, striving to avoid inhaling the toxic haze. Gradually, all grew to loathe this healing smoke. When the final bundles of herbs had burned to ash and the smoke dispersed, the palace fell silent in the lingering stench. Without the fragrant cover, the foul odor stood revealed, sharper than ever. Only then did the court realize. The smoke merely blinded them for a time. The underlying filth and contagion remained, seeping into every wall and column. In the end, burning hundreds of bundles of herbs and incense revealed the blind folly of superstition. Henry VIII, once conqueror of Europe, had allowed his half measures of power to transform the palace into a prison of toxic smoke and dread. Whenever the haze enveloped the throne, no one dared look directly at it. The withering flames of herb bundles and incense stood as reminders that, sometimes, the most outlandish chemical cures cannot heal the deepest wounds of body and soul. Hygiene habit number 10. Banning mirrors and draping all reflective surfaces to conceal a filthy body. When all efforts to hide the stench and the gangrenous wound proved futile, Henry VIII turned to a psychological solution. He decreed a total ban on mirrors throughout the palace, fearing that any glass surface would reveal flakes of dead skin, crusted sweat, and oozing pus on his body. By royal order, every mirror frame was removed and tightly wrapped in coarse black cloth, bound with thorny cords to prevent even a glint of metal from peeking through. Only oil paintings depicting hunting scenes, feasts, and landscapes remained on the walls without a single reflective surface. Henry believed that if he could not see his own filthy appearance, his spirit would remain steadfast, and no courtier would dare comment. In reality, this decree deprived him of any means of self-inspection. Without mirrors, he had no way to know how far the gangrene had spread, how thick the crusted skin was, or whether his foul breath betrayed him. Each morning, upon waking, Henry could only gauge his condition by his own groans, the way the herbal smoke seeped into his pillow, or by the grease stains on his bed linens. Not only were large mirrors banned, but also small dressing table mirrors, hand mirrors, and mirrors in the bathing chamber, all were forbidden. The ladies in waiting and attendants who once used mirrors to adjust their attire now had to evaluate their appearance by feel alone. They lowered their gazes, sat with their backs to the window to catch the faint natural light on the opaque glass, then hurriedly turned away from the cloth-covered mirror for fear that any reflection might incur the king's wrath for violating a royal edict. Emissary. The ban extended even further. Courtiers were strictly forbidden to utter the words filthy or stinking. Anyone who slipped up would be transferred to quarters far from the palace centre or publicly flogged as a warning to others. Many high officials who attempted to explain that the air was fouled by herbal smoke found that even a single utterance of foul odour cost them their positions or banishment to remote lodging within the palace grounds. The Tudor palace, once famed for its abundant natural light from stained glass windows, now had those windows draped in heavy cloth to prevent any stray beam from reflecting off the few remaining mirrors. As a result, the entire palace became dark and oppressive, suffocating like a sealed cavern. Courtiers navigated by the flicker of candles, shunning every step for fear of stumbling. During banquets, tables were dimly lit, with only wavering candlelight illuminating the faces of servants and minimizing the chance that anyone might catch a glimpse of the king's crusted lesions. This habit also obscured any personal accountability. In his private chamber, Henry owned only a small bell to summon attendants, without mirrors. He could not tell if his hair was matted with grease, or if his moustache was dusted with charcoal from the incense smoke. On multiple occasions, Queen Anne meticulously combed his hair and trimmed stray moustache hairs to prevent suspicious glances from visiting dignitaries. The ladies-in-waiting had to view for the king, ensuring any disarray in his seating or costume was adjusted to proper courtly decorum. The illusion of cleanliness, the habit's intended purpose, turned Henry into a man living in an artificial shell. He believed that without mirrors, and without anyone seeing him filthy, his absolute power remained unchallenged. In truth, this practice turned the palace into an opaque fortress, hiding both his physical deterioration and the medical paralysis of the royal household. All flaws, from the overwhelming stench to the spreading gangrene, were simply shoved beneath the cloth covering the mirrors. But they did not disappear. The court became a closed system. Every detail of the king's health and personal hygiene was concealed. Officials communicated only by whispered commands, daring not commit anything to paper. When reporting to higher ranks, they spoke in euphemisms like tainted vapors or unusual conditions, avoiding direct references to the gangrene or stench. Outside the palace, rumour spread, likening the Tudor court to a bat's lair, where everything was hidden in darkness. People mocked the cloth-draped mirrors as the actions of one refusing to face the truth, a shameful flaw so grotesque it defied belief. Many claimed that Henry VIII did not dare look at his own reflection, like a soul terrified of a haunted mirror's reveal. Through this practice of concealment, Henry VIII demonstrated how absolute power can blind rationality, rather than confronting and remedying his hygiene issues. He chose to hide them, creating a palace that was dark, stifling, and illusionary. Westminster Palace, once a symbol of royal authority, had become a sealed dungeon where the walls not only concealed mirrors, but also obscured the truths of the royal body and its sins. When night fell, every source of light, be it candle or sunbeam, was stifled by the draped cloth, leaving Henry VIII alone with his delusion of unmatched cleanliness. Hygiene habit number 11. Excruciating rashes from wearing steel armor, velvet, and heavy jeans that trap sweat. Henry VIII was renowned for his lavish royal wardrobe and commanding presence. He especially favored tight-fitting battle garb, consisting of steel armor, fur-lined velvet, and thick jeans attire that symbolized honor, yet turned into a hygienic nightmare. Though sweat poured off him like a waterfall throughout ceremonies and drills, Henry steadfastly refused to remove his armor mid-event, claiming that court protocol forbids any lapse in appearance before his subjects. From the very start of every banquet, when he donned the cold metal plates and snug velvet layers, perspiration immediately accumulated between the fabrics, his body temperature rose, and the heavy materials prevented evaporation, clogging his pores. Within hours, tiny red itchy bumps began appearing on his chest, back, and thighs. At first, Henry felt only mild discomfort, but when those bumps ruptured, oozing fluid and pus, the itch turned into a scorching pain. Throughout every audience, even enthroned on a velvet and brocade dais, Henry could not sit still. Each cough or shift in position sent a stabbing sensation through the rash, like thousands of needles piercing his flesh. Yet he would not permit the armor's removal. First, for royal dignity, and second, because one must never shed garments before the court. A rancid miasma of sweat and pus rose in waves, an acrid blend of heated metal and rotting flesh. His attendants, positioned on either side, dared only press coarse cloth against the armor to absorb some odor, a gesture that only heightened Henry's irritation, forcing him to plaster on a strained smile as he addressed his nobles. By the flickering candlelight, the lesions on his skin became all the more grotesque. Red, swollen borders, some weeping blood, others discharging yellow-green pus. The inner velvet lining, soaked in sweat and exudate, clung to his skin, making each movement elicit a hoarse groan from Henry. Courtiers whispered that in the king's dressing chamber, the court physician recoiled upon seeing the blackened, sodden lining and the lightly rusted armor plates. No one dared linger. The king's agonized cries echoed off the frigid stone walls, a dark warning of the medical nightmare threatening the throne. From a modern medical perspective, this condition is known as maceration dermatitis. Clogged pores, persistent moisture, and lack of airflow create a breeding ground for bacteria and fungi, forming blisters that eventually ulcerate. Deprived of oxygen and light, the skin cannot heal. Instead, the wounds expand, prolonging agony. Whenever Henry coughed, the armor plates scraped his sides, intensifying the stench until even the palace's stone ramparts seemed stained by this living nightmare. The physical torment was matched by a growing irritability. At council meetings, Henry would stomp his foot, rap his sword hilt against the floor, or hurl a chair when the pain became unbearable. Initially, courtiers would gently attempt to calm him. Soon, they only sat in silence. Wary of every gesture, respect gave way to fear, and the once formal court became a tense chamber where even a single word might trigger the king's wrath. On restless nights, when Henry turned in bed, the steel cuirass pressed so tightly against his chest and belly that he could not breathe deeply. Beads of sweat trickled down his forehead onto the lining, mixing with pus to form damp, foul patches under the armor. His muttered pleas, remove the armor so the itch will stop, echoed through the dark, prompting attendants to silently drape extra blankets, cinch curtains, and leave only a single flickering candle to keep others out of the grim scene. Henry once attempted a remedy by punching ventilation holes in his armor, but the court forbade this as contrary to ceremonial law. He resigned himself to the relentless pain, considering it part of his glorious legacy. On one occasion, following a grand procession, he was carried to his private sick room. There, the physicians were ordered to shear away sections of armor, piece by piece, wash him, and redress the ulcers. The metallic rasp of shears, the acrid smell of heated iron, and the stench of pus were so overwhelming that even the most seasoned attendants averted their eyes and pinched their nostrils. Thus, Henry VIII's penchant for tight-fitting armor became more than a symbol of authority. It served as a stark reminder that excessive power can imprison its wielder in unending suffering. Westminster Palace, once a monument of splendor, became an arena of physical torture. The oozing sores and rank sweat that clung to the throne served as a timeless warning of the price paid when power and honor are forced upon a tormented body. As the rash spread and the stench intensified, the echo of Henry's faint moans resonated through the Tudor court, not only the sound of agony, but the lament of a royal tragedy no kingdom could ever forget. Horrific habit number 12, commanding the royal physicians to analyze his feces twice daily. From the first light of dawn until the sun sank below the horizon, Henry VIII spared no detail in monitoring his health, even matters of his bowels. By royal decree, the king's physicians were obliged to collect a sample of his stool each early morning and again at nightfall. Loyal attendants, clad in heavy brown mantles, brought special porcelain cups to his bedside, waited until Henry had relieved himself, and deftly caught the specimen. Immediately thereafter, the physicians, wrapped in thick cloaks and gloved in leather, carried the cups to the apothecary's chamber directly beneath the palace. There, they compared the colour of the stool against a reference chart decreed by the crown. Bright saffron yellow, like fresh turmeric, signified robust digestion. Deep brown indicated weak liver and kidneys. Dark green or black was deemed an ill omen, warning of serious illness. Using a wooden spoon, They measured the consistency too loose. Watery stool signaled imminent dysentery, too firm. Hardened stool foretold severe constipation. Every observation date, hour of sampling, hue, texture, odor was recorded meticulously in leather-bound registers. Each entry sealed with the red stamp of the palace guard. Any anomaly, even a faint greyish tint, forced the physicians to kneel in apology and report directly to the throne. A single dissatisfied nod from Henry could result in censure or demotion for lack of vigilance. To shorten the journey and prevent the stench from wafting through the court, the council erected a dedicated vault beneath the dispensary, carved from cold stone. Its damp walls enclosed 2 earth-lined compartments for the porcelain cups. Eunuchs carrying the samples navigated narrow corridors filled with the pungent tang of ammonia and decay, many fainting from the oppressive odor, forced to rush outside for fresh air. This twice-daily scrutiny persisted for months, turned into a tool of power. Only physicians with flawless reports could hope for advancement. Any hint of abnormal stool, even the slightest, meant dismissal. Fearful of disgrace or worse, the medical staff recorded each sample with the precision of artisans, detailing even the faintest ammonia note, lest they be accused of error. The stench in the vault was so intense, it gasped the chief physician himself. They spoke of mounds of yellow, brown, and green samples piled like cinders under dim lamplight, bubbles rising in ominous hiss, testing every lung that dared enter. Though medieval medicine held that stool revealed the body's inner workings, this ritual served not healing but loyalty tests. Healthcare became a weapon to threaten the physicians' lives. One faulty entry, and they faced public flogging or exile to forced labour. On one bitter evening, while Henry sipped his after-dinner tea, the chief physician nervously presented the night's sample. Lifting the lid unleashed such a blast of acrid ammonia and foul decay that he collapsed before the king. A blood-curdling scream echoed through the halls as torches flickered, and attendants carried the stricken doctor into a draughty corridor, where the wind moaned like dying embers. Henry merely nodded, his voice grave. "I require clear results. Do not let the stool mislead my commands." At dawn, the fallen physician was assigned to guard the royal armoury, the lowest post in the realm, a bitter lesson for loyalty's sake. Thus, the practice of analysing stool twice daily was not mere eccentricity, but an abuse of medicine to cement power. From the chief physician down to the lowliest attendant, all lived in dread. Each sampling tested not only the king's health, but also their own fealty, judged by colour and odour. The Tudor palace became a labyrinth of rot and terror, a timeless warning that when power exceeds reason, even the sanctity of healthcare can become a blade against the living. Horrific habit. Number 13. Soaking his feet in putrid, salt water, and animal fat. Each night, after the palace had fallen silent, following lavish banquets and the distant notes of the harpsichord still lingered, Henry VIII commenced a horrifying ritual, soaking his feet in a massive wooden basin filled with biting salt water, blended with rancid pork fat and decaying animal entrails. The basin was placed directly in his royal bedchamber, its ghostly outline illuminated by pale candlelight, creating a scene both archaic and grotesque. First, a loyal eunuch, lugged in a heavy tub of coarse rock salt. The salt was boiled with water until it dissolved entirely, leaving a brine so sharp it cut the tongue. Next, they added darkened, congealed pork fat and chunks of entrails, heart, liver, small intestines left out in the open air for an entire day. The kitchen staff glanced at the foul mixture and grimaced, but none dared defy the king's command. They set the basin upon a wooden stand, their gloved hands pressing against the wall for support, as a wave of rank stench filled the chamber. Henry, draped in a thin velvet robe, settled into an armchair. He slowly removed his shoes and hose, then immersed his bare feet in the tub. The brine, stiff with fat, immediately surged up around his ankles, sending a shiver through him. At first, he believed the fat would form a protective layer around his gangrenous wounds to block further infection, while the salt would serve as a disinfectant. However, within minutes, the disastrous reality became unmistakable. His feet began to scorch as if boiled in oil. The lesions, once oozing small amounts of pus, now ballooned into painful blisters and cracked open like steamed shrimp. The pork fat clung to the raw flesh, mixing with the seeping discharge and rancid pus, turning his skin slimy and more foul-smelling. Henry could not stifle his agonized moans. Ah, the pain is unbearable. The eunuchs hastily placed coarse cloths beneath the basin to catch drips of the contaminated liquid. Yet the stench, sharp as ammonia and decay, assaulted their senses, forcing them to grip the doorframe to avoid fainting. Some dared to slip away, only to encounter palace guards at every exit. Any delay meant rebuke for interfering with His Majesty's treatment. Night after night, Henry's pained groans echoed down the corridors and into the dressing chambers. Summoning the royal physicians in haste, they scooped away fat and pus with small spoons, rinsed the wounds with warm water, and redressed the lesions. This gruesome clean-up stretched into the early hours, bathing the entire palace in a gloomy, fetid atmosphere. Many courtiers pressed handkerchiefs to their noses and fled to the antechamber for relief from the stench. From a modern medical perspective, soaking wounds in such a filthy concoction only accelerates bacterial growth and forces gangrene to spread more rapidly. Rather than sterilizing, the salt and rancid fat suffocated the devitalized tissue, preventing any oxygen from reaching the skin and deepening the ulcers. Henry's pain swelled so excruciatingly that he could not sleep, tossing and turning, clutching the basin's rim. His groans, those of a man in utter despair. For Henry, this ritual was both a superstitious belief and a symbol of his ultimate authority. He compelled his courtiers to facilitate his pain to its fullest extent. In truth, it imprisoned him in a vortex of suffering, immortalizing the image of a once great monarch haunted by his own horrific habit. When the soak finally ended each night, and his feet were meticulously bandaged, the scent of salt and burning fat lingered on his skin, trailing down his pant legs with every drop of perspiration, a constant reminder that this practice offered no salvation, only an unending nightmare. Horrific habit number 14, gargling with fresh urine. Henry VIII believed his own golden water possessed supreme antiseptic properties. Therefore, each morning upon waking, and after every meal, he would sip several mouthfuls of fresh urine collected directly into a special porcelain vessel and swish it around his mouth. By the flickering glow of oil lamps, Henry held the vessel, poured teaspoonfuls of urine into his mouth, kept it for a few seconds, and then spat it out. He thought the urine would wash away bacteria and pathogens, protecting his teeth and gums from any poisoning plots. However, modern medicine tells us that urine contains urea, ammonia, and mineral salts, which do not kill oral bacteria, but instead feed them. The result, when combined with the mouth's natural microbiota, was a pungent, rancid odor that spread through his oral and nasal passages. After only a few weeks of this practice, Henry began to suffer the consequences. His enamel gradually eroded, and chunks of tooth structure broke away when he bit down on hard food. Many of his front teeth, once gleaming like pearls, developed dull brown stains and cracks. First came the sharp pain whenever he drank cold water or inhaled the morning air. Then came gingivitis, swollen, bleeding gums when he gargled vigorously. On one occasion, Henry even groaned in agony as the pain radiated up to his temples. At every audience, when courtiers advanced to pay homage, Henry had to suppress the foul breath. The thick, dried urine smell lingering in his mouth mixed with incense smoke and the rancid oils from his meals. creating a potent aroma that forced attendants to sit far back in the gallery, covering their faces with silk handkerchiefs. Many prominent nobles discreetly swallowed hard. Struggling to remain composed in the king's presence, Henry's dental health deteriorated rapidly. He relied on royal dentists to pluck out the shattered teeth with forceps and replace them with crude resin fillings. Enduring prolonged agony, the palace physicians urged him to abandon the urine gargle in favor of herbal rinses or diluted vinegar, but Henry refused to relent. He insisted that only his own urine held the divine, antiseptic power fit for his court. Occasionally, Henry even commanded his attendants to gargle his urine to verify its purity. Anyone who dared complain or refuse was punished for defiling royal ritual, even demoted or dismissed. Chambermaids carried the urine vessel wherever the king went, watching the clock to ensure they were ready whenever he felt queasy or needed to rinse. In the end, Henry lost nearly all his teeth and suffered chronic gum infections, with his mouth perpetually oozing pus and bleeding ulcers. Far from preserving his health, the habit of gargling fresh urine turned the king's mouth into a breeding ground for bacteria, costing him his radiant smile and leaving every word tainted by a fetid breath. This horrifying practice marked a tragic chapter in Henry VIII's life, where power was guided by superstition, and his body endured relentless suffering. Horrific habit number 15. Blocking all drafts in the bathing chamber. Henry VIII believed that any breeze entering the bathing chamber could give him a chill, preventing the wash water from maintaining its satisfactory temperature and harming royal health. Therefore, he ordered every crack in the bathing room to be sealed. Windows, gaps beneath doors, every joint between walls, ceiling, and tiled floor were covered with heavy cloth or sealed with clay. Along the corridor leading to the bath, a heavy curtain was drawn tightly so that not a single gust of wind could slip inside. As a result, even though the water was boiled for hours in a copper cauldron, when it was poured into the wooden tub, it did not cool in fresh air, but became increasingly filthy. Fat from grand banquets mixed with dry flakes of Henry's peeling skin, and even shrimp shells and bits of seafood left over on his body, all dissolving into the water. After numerous baths, a rancid film of fat accumulated on the tub's rim, and the water shifted from crystal clear to murky and opaque. Each time he immersed himself, Henry faced a slimy mixture, a cesspool teeming with bacteria. The bathing ritual became a horror show. He sat in the tub, watching bubbles rise in the dark yellow water as a horrid stench wafted up. His skin, already damaged by other grotesque habits, was in direct contact with the polluted water. The gangrenous sores spread further, itching across his body. Henry often had to scratch himself with a wooden stick, causing more flakes of dead skin to fall into the murky bath. His attendants, by the flicker of weak candlelight, shuddered at the scene. They feared the dirty water would splash onto the wooden doors and glazed tiles, but dared not open windows or cracks for ventilation. Whenever they entered the bath chamber to help the king undress, they clamped their hands over their noses against the overpowering smell. Many wore heavy hoods pulled over their faces, afraid both of prolonged exposure and of slipping on the slick tile floor. By modern medical standards, bathing in such contaminated water fosters the growth of bacteria and mold all over the body. The skin is not cleansed, but instead becomes more deeply infected. Henry's itching intensified each day. Pustulas erupted, then burst into oozing sores. After every bath, he required fresh bandaging and bitterly lay waiting for the palace's salt water or perfumed oils to be applied to soothe his itching. For Henry, blocking all drafts in the bathing chamber was not only a superstition, but also a manifestation of absolute power. He placed the avoidance of a chill above basic hygiene standards. In truth, this habit transformed the royal bathing chamber into an instrument of bodily torture, turning the once mighty king into a victim of his own misguided beliefs fueled by power. Though the tub remained filled with hot water, each wash plunged Henry deeper into torment. His flesh aggravated, itching ceaselessly, while the court stood by helplessly as their sovereign immersed himself in the dark delirium of this bizarre habit. Horrific habit number 16. Forcing attendants to lick blood and pus from his wounds to test for poison. Henry VIII grew increasingly suspicious that his courtiers intended to poison him, especially as the gangrenous sores on his legs and arms continued to ooze blood and pus. He believed that only a trial by ingestion, having someone else taste the wound exudate directly, could reveal traces of any poisonous substances. Therefore, each morning after his bath and dressing, he ordered at least 2 male attendants to present spoonfuls of fresh blood and droplets of pus for him to taste. The ritual took place in the royal treatment chamber, under a suspended oil lamp. Henry, seated in an armchair, lifted the hem of his robe while the court physician carefully removed the bandages. Blood and pus dripped onto the lacquered wooden table, and the physician scooped them into a small porcelain bowl. The 2 attendants, usually long-serving men who dared not refuse, had their wrists loosely bound, bowed for permission, then leaned forward and flicked out their tongues to taste the fluid. The tip of the tongue touching the gangrenous lesion, saliva thick with pus, adhering to their teeth and throats. Henry watched their facial expressions closely. If either attendant grimaced, retracted his tongue, or gagged, the king took it as proof of poison and immediately ordered the intermediary to be interrogated. Conversely, if they remained composed, neither wrinkling their face nor coughing, Henry sighed in relief, believing himself safe. Despite burning lips and agonized bellies, the attendants stifled their pain and complied obediently. Many subsequently developed sore throats and high fevers from swallowing infected pus. Some lost their positions due to persistent coughing, and others required weeks of convalescence. Yet no one dared complain, for to do so would be to treat the king's life lightly. This practice continued for many months. The treatment chamber reeked of fresh blood and putrid pus. The attendants' hesitant licks, their hacking coughs, and their ragged breaths echoed like a haunting melody. On one occasion, Henry even shuffled into the corridor after a tasting session, smiling with satisfaction to see his 2 attendants still standing proof, in his mind, of their unquestioning loyalty. According to modern medicine, tasting ulcer exudate to test for poison is not only unscientific but extremely dangerous. Gangrenous bacteria can enter the body through tiny mouth wounds, leading to septicemia. Yet for Henry, his superstitious fear of poisoning overrode all medical reason. Horrific habit number 16 closes the series of the 16 most gruesome hygiene practices of Henry VIII, from breeding maggots in his ulcers to forcing others to lick his wound exudate. It demonstrates that when absolute power combines with superstition and overwhelming fear, even the most loyal can be driven to unimaginable acts of horror. And so we have just explored the 16 most horrifying hygiene habits of Henry VIII, from breeding maggots in his ulcers to forcing others to lick his wound, plus each detail illustrating how absolute power can drive a person to unimaginable superstition and self-destruction. Thank you for following all the way to the end of the video. Now, I wish you a peaceful night and pleasant dreams. Hopefully these dark secrets will not haunt you for too long. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and give us a like, so you won't miss our latest and most exciting videos. See you again on our next journey.